Okay, good morning, everyone. I see you're all signing in here. So I see Jenna's here. Good morning, Jenna. Morning, Casey. Good morning, Ivan and Erica and Karen and Thea, I think. I'm not really sure how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Sam's here. Good morning, Sam. Um, Lily's here and Mashid is here. Good morning to both of you. How you guys doing? Justin's here. Good morning, Justin. How's it going? How did yesterday go? Okay. Did you meet all your teachers and manage to connect with everyone you needed to? Banamer's here. Good morning, Banamer. Nice to see you, or hear from you, I guess. Um, yeah. So from what I hear, we still have a few last students registering. I think maybe today, and so we may get another few students in this class. We may not. I guess we'll find out. Boz here. Good morning to you. We may have a we may have an extra student or so tomorrow, but I guess we'll find out. So what I'll do with you today, I think, is um, we'll kind of just lay the groundwork for social justice. We'll talk a little bit about what sorts of things we're talking about and think about how we should think about social justice topics. Um, who else is here? Monica's here. Good morning, Monica. Good morning, Caleb. Nice to see you or hear from you. Um, yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of some of the things that we'll be talking about. And tomorrow I'll get you doing some reading and some discussing. I just have to do some reading in terms of figuring out how to break you up within Microsoft Teams, and I'll figure that out for tomorrow. So I'll get you. We'll try to do some video conferencing tomorrow. Today, again, I'll just give you a little bit of a background of what we're talking about, just so that we don't jump too far ahead if we get extra students in this class. Okay. Good morning, Jimmy. Nice to see you here. Um, okay, so I'm going to jump right in. I've got some slides that I'll put up on the screen. You'll have access to these later. I'll post them on student portal for us. Um, you won't be able to see me at the same time as the slides, but I'm going to fix that. There's a way to do that in this software I'm using. I just forgot how to do it. And so I'll figure that out for tomorrow too, so that you'll be able to see me and you'll be able to see the slides at the same time. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just hop into that. Keep in mind though, while I'm talking and while the slides are on the screen, you can't see me, but I can still see any comments that you put into the live chat. So if you have questions or if you want me to explain something or slow down or whatever you want me to do, I can still see your comments. Okay, and I may ask you to type something in. So let's see here. All right, so we'll start here. This is a course. This is a course on social justice, right? And so um, the first things that I'd like to talk about with you are, number one, what social justice is, and secondly, why should we care about it? Why should we have a whole class devoted to it? And thirdly, how can we understand social justice? And so when I say how we understand it, I'm thinking more about the sort of perspective we'll take, the way that we will look at some of these topics. Okay, and I'll kind of walk you through. I'll walk you through these things as we go. Okay. The other thing I'll just mention too is that I haven't lectured to anyone for about a month or so, and I'm feeling a little rusty still. So forgive me if I kind of lose my train of thought or whatever, because it's, I have to get used to doing this again. Okay, so here we go. When we talk about social justice, we're talking about a few things. Number one, we're talking about people and society, how we interact with each other, how we work with each other, and what kinds of things are fair and what kinds of things are not fair. Okay, obviously that's a very basic idea of what we're talking about here, but you can see on the slide I've got the idea that everybody in society deserves and should have equal access to the same rights and resources, right? We want everyone in society to be able to get the things that they need, and we want everyone to have fairly equal access to those things, okay? Again, that sounds very basic and very simple, and in some ways it is very basic and very simple, but understanding that and figuring out how to accomplish that equal access is far more complicated than it seems. But again, we'll get there. Don't worry. But on the surface, it seems very simple, right? We want everyone in society to have equal access to the things, the basic resources that they need to live. Social justice also embraces values such as human rights. And so, if you know anything about human rights, which I suspect you probably do, human rights have been around for centuries, really. Depending on what society, what historical society you go to, many cultures and civilizations have outlined ways in which humans should be treated, right? Ways that people deserve to be treated. In kind of the modern world, the way that we think about human rights are patterned after, I believe, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And so that's kind of, in most of the modern world, that's kind of what we're thinking of when we talk about human rights. But when we talk about social justice, we are interested in human rights. We're interested in ideas of that all people are equal, and within a country, all citizens are equal. And again, their equal right to be able to meet their basic needs and to get opportunities that they might desire. So we might think about opportunities like education. We might think about opportunities like healthcare. We might think about opportunities in terms of employment and advancing their careers and pursuing their goals. Again, we want people to have reasonably equal access to those opportunities. We want people to be able to try to get the things that they want to get and try to achieve the things that they want to achieve. And then finally, where we can, we want to make sure that we eliminate any inequalities that are unjustified. Again, that's a very complicated question. It seems very simple on the surface, but people are inherently unequal, right? We're all born unique. We're all born different. We're not born the same, right? Every human being is unique, and so we are not perfectly identical. And so it's actually a very complicated question sometimes in terms of figuring out how to make things equal for individuals that are all unique, that are all different. Again, some of these things seem very easy to think about on the surface, but as we dig into it, we will, or at least I hope we'll find that the picture is a lot more complicated than you might think. Why should we care about social justice? Why should we pay attention to this stuff anyway? For a few reasons, I think. We will, by the end of this course, I think we'll have a better handle on this question. We'll be able to answer the question of why we should care about equality within society. For now, I'm going to sort of leave it open. I don't want to answer the question quite yet, because I think it's something that would be more useful for us to answer a little bit further down the road, a little bit further into the course. But ultimately, what we decide on what we decide on an answer for this question in the end will have a lot to do with who we are as people, as individual people. And so our understanding of how the world works, so the culture and the country that we were raised in, the society in which we live, those things will influence how we feel about social inequality. It will influence what we think is fair and what we think is not fair. Again, our ideologies will influence our answer to this question. Ideologies, we'll talk more about ideology as we go. When I say, excuse me, when I say ideology, I mean the really kind of big ideas that we all believe in society. Ways in which we think the world works. Those will influence the way that we perceive social justice and perceive equality and inequality. Our values and our morals. Part of social justice is fairness, right? Is a sense of justice, and so our own personal values and our own personal morals have an influence on what we think is right and wrong, right? It has an influence on what we think is fair, and so that will influence why we might care about social justice. And finally, and we'll talk about this a little bit more today, who we are as social people. Okay. So as I'll talk about very shortly, all of us are unique. We belong to different social groups. And so based on the social groups that we belong to, it will influence the way that we experience society, and it will influence the way that we perceive fairness and equality and justice. But again, we'll get to that in just a little bit, okay? So again, why should we care about social justice? Well, it's a complicated question. But again, I think it's one that will be better equipped to answer just a little bit further down the road, okay? The last thing I want to, not the last thing, but the third thing I wanted to talk to you about in this first part of my lecture here is how can we understand social justice? So how can we best explore this topic? In order to talk about social justice, we'll have to approach it in a specific way. We'll have to approach the material in a specific way. And here's kind of what I'm thinking. First of all, we're going to be taking a critical approach to social justice. Okay? I'll explain. You may think you know what that means, and you may very well be right, but I'll explain what that means in just a second. Secondly, we're going to look at the world from the perspective that society is stratified. Okay, so we're going to assume, and it's a valid assumption. If you wonder what that sound in the background is, it's my cat scratching and having a good time. We're going to look at society as stratified, and so the idea that within any society that we belong to or that we engage with, there is inequality. Some people have more power and more resources and more opportunities than other people do, and I think probably most of us know that intuitively already. But we're going to assume that that's the case, all right? The third thing that we'll try to remember here, and I'll explain this very shortly, is the idea that our perceptions of the world are not all the same, okay? Well, no, I won't get into it now. I'll explain it in a second. Our perceptions of the world are not all the same. And finally, the last thing is that sometimes the things that we know or the things that we think we know are actually counterintuitive. And again, I'll explain that in a second, but what counterintuitive means is that the things that are true don't seem true. seem to fly in the face or contradict our personal experience. Okay, and I'll explain that. I'll explain that momentarily. Okay, I'm just going to take a 10-second break here. How are we doing? Are we okay? Can you hear me well? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you have any questions? What do you think? Are we good? Let me know in the comments if we're good, we're not good. Erica's good, giving me a thumbs up. That's good. Baja's good. That's awesome. Right. Okay, we got some thumbs up. That's good. Okay, Karen's good. Ivan's good. Jenna's got 2 thumbs up. Casey's good. All right. Rashid's good. All right. That sounds good. Again, if you have any questions as we go, you can always just throw them up into the comments and I will answer them, I promise, because I can see them as we go, okay? Okay. Good, Banner's good. All right, here we go. So, the first part of understanding social justice is taking a critical stance, okay? And sometimes when we hear the word critical, of course, we're thinking about criticizing, right? Which is not fun to be on the end of, right? It's finding people finding fault with your things or saying negative things about you, and that's related to what we're talking about, but not quite. When we talk about critical approaches here, what we're talking about is one, we're going to be using the skill of critical thinking, which we'll talk about possibly tomorrow or maybe Friday. But we're also going to operate from the idea that knowledge is socially constructed. And so you may have heard about social constructions before. I'm guessing you probably haven't. Social constructions, the idea of a social construction is very prominent in social science. And so you'll find the idea of social constructions in anthropology, you'll find it in sociology. And basically what it means is that humans live in a world that is somewhat imaginary in the way that we create our reality based on what we agree reality to be. Okay, as we'll get to a little bit later, humans, us strange human beings, we like to give meaning to our experiences. And so as we walk through our lives, we are walking through we're walking through a world that we have given meaning to. If you think about my cat, who I'm just watching sitting out on the balcony looking out the window, she doesn't really give any meaning to her world, right? She experiences it. She sees birds and me and her food and all those kinds of things, but she doesn't give meaning to her experience the way that humans do. And so all of those meanings that we give to our experiences in our world and all those judgments that we make about it, those things go into the social construction of our reality. And so we develop ideas about the way the world works. We develop ideas about what's right and wrong. We develop ideas about who people are or who people should be. All of those are social constructions. And we kind of absorb them from the culture and the society that we live in. And so we'll get to this a little bit later too, but these social constructions, we kind of learn them without really knowing that we're learning them. And so all of our heads out there are full of these social constructions, these ways in which we make meaning in the world. Um, yeah. Again, hopefully that will make sense now, but it will make more sense as we go through this and as we talk more about social constructions. Okay, so, but for the time being, we're going to think about the idea that knowledge is socially constructed. Many things in human societies are true only because we all agree that they are. Okay? Um, Secondly, we're going to agree that society is stratified. And so I'm kind of introducing a new term to you here, the idea of social stratification. And so I think it's Latin. The Latin word strata means layer. And so society has layers. The top layers are people who have lots of money and lots of power and lots of influence. And then there's people, as you move down the layers of society, people usually have less money, less status, and less opportunity. Sometimes you see this represented as a pyramid, and I think, do I have a little? Oh, yeah, good. I have a little pyramid drawing. Sometimes you see social stratification laid out like this. This is more of a status and economic pyramid here, where you see people in upper classes with lots of money, they tend to be on the top, and there tend to be fewer of them. And then further, as you move further down the pyramid, there are sort of more regular people with less money and less power, but of course there's usually more of them in a society. The third thing I wanted to talk about here is our idea that our perceptions of the world are not all the same. Okay? Now, I want to introduce this concept of identity here. And identity is a word that you're probably familiar with. It's probably a word that you think you know the meaning of, and you're probably correct. To have an identity is to have a character, is to be something or someone, right? And so I think we all kind of instinctively know who we are, right, as individual persons. If somebody asked you to describe yourself to them, you might not be comfortable doing it, but you would know how, right? You know roughly who you are. You know what your identity is. And so that's kind of what I'd like you to do for the next minute or two. I would like you to take 2 minutes and think about some of the characteristics that make you you. Okay, so I'm looking for some adjectives that describe who you are. Okay, so that's what I'd like you to do. Again, this will be a little bit odd because we're not doing this in real life, but take 2 minutes and come up with as many adjectives for yourself as you can, words that describe you, who you are. Okay, so take 2 minutes and do that, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, so that's about 2 minutes. In the comments, in the live chat comments, can you type in some words that you came up with? Okay, so don't be shy. We're not going to hold you to any of these. Just throw some words up there that you think describe you. Okay, I'm going to start things off. I'm going to start things off and say that I think I am friendly. Now, whether that's true or not is another story, but I'm going to put that up there. But type in some words. What did you come up with? Words that describe who you are. Okay, so Karen's shy and talkative. All right. Jenna's happy. Well, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. What else do we have? Talkative. Good. Crazy. Okay. I feel like I'm missing out not being in the same room as all of these talkative, crazy people. Careful, detailed, adventurous. Okay. Kind, friendly, adventurous, shy, good. Boring. I don't believe that, Justin, but that's okay. What else did you come up with? Come on, give me more. She's a little bit shy. Happy and shy. Okay, Lily. Impulsive, motivated, honest, and loyal, and socially. Okay, good. All right, that's looking good so far. Lazy. Yeah, so I feel that way too, Manish, especially first thing in the morning. Sometimes it's easy to feel lazy. Friendly and talkative, Jimmy. Yeah, friendly, good. All you friendly people, that's awesome. All right. Very good. Okay, these are all really good. These are all really good adjectives, and they describe kind of ourselves. They describe who we are. Why did I have you do this? Well, I wanted to demonstrate a few things. Number one, I wanted to demonstrate that, first of all, our identities extend, easygoing, good. Our identities extend beyond our individual characteristics, okay? How we interact with others is also relevant and important. So if you think about, or if you look at some of the adjectives that people suggested here in the comments, how many of them require other people to be present? Okay, so my question is, lots of people put that they were friendly or that they were talkative, but can you be friendly by yourself? Can you be friendly when no one else is around? Not so much, right? If you felt you were shy, can you be shy when no one else is around? Well, not really, right? So even though we are coming up with characteristics that identify who we are as people, a lot of who we are as people depends on our interactions with others, right? So in a certain way, we can't really be who we are without other people around us, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. So I wanted to point out, of course, that there are certain characteristics that are inherently ours, right? So if you're adventurous, you can be adventurous by yourself. That's easily doable. But some things require, other people are important in our lives because they allow us to be who we are, right? You can't be friendly by yourself. can you be really funny by yourself? Maybe, maybe not. But you require other people to help you complete who you are, right? So I wanted to use this little exercise to show you that. Um, but I also wanted to do this exercise to introduce positionality. And because if you look at all of those adjectives that we came up with, none of them really had to do with our group memberships. And so for me, I'm a member of a lot of different social groups, right? Obviously, I'm a member of my own family. Other parts of my identity are that I am a brother, I'm a son, I'm a teacher, I'm a Canadian citizen, I'm a man, I'm a male. I am a, oh, this is going to hurt to say, I am a broadly middle aged person. Um, I am not strongly religious, and so I'm not strongly religious. I'm white. Okay, so I belong to a bunch of social groups, so groups that society says exist. But interestingly, lots of us don't think of ourselves in those categories. And in part, that's because we are usually taught to see ourselves as individuals, right? We're taught to see ourselves as unique people who have unique characteristics. And that's absolutely true. We are unique people with unique characteristics. But for the purposes of this course, it's also important that we learn to see. No, I don't want to say that. It's also important that we understand that the groups, the broad social groups that we belong to, is also an important part of our identity. And it influences the way that we experience society. Okay? And so that's what that concept of positionality actually is. And this is kind of a social justice term, but positionality is the idea that the social groups that you belong to influences the way that you experience society. Okay? And so for me, when I walk through Canadian society, let's say, when I sort of walk down the street, as a reasonably large white male, I'm going to have a slightly different experience of society than perhaps an older Chinese woman. Okay, people are going to interact with this Chinese woman differently than they would with me, and I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong or good or bad at this point. I'm simply saying that society treats us differently based on who we are, right? If you're super, super attractive, people are going to treat you differently than if you're kind of normal looking like the rest of us, right? So to sort of imagine this idea, think about this. I'll give you a minute and think about this. So if you woke up tomorrow morning and you got out of bed and you looked in the mirror and discovered that you are now Rihanna, or you can be Dwayne the Rock Johnson if that's easier for you. If you woke up tomorrow and you were suddenly that person, would people treat you differently when you walk out the door? And I think we all pretty instinctively know that people would treat us differently, right? If I woke up tomorrow and I was The Rock, people would interact with me in a totally different way than they interact with me right now, right? And this is kind of a very extreme example and kind of a silly one because I don't think we're going to wake up tomorrow as a totally different person, but it does illustrate the idea that people will treat us differently based on who we are. And Some of those things have to do with our personal characteristics, like if we're friendly or if we're shy or if we're socially interactive. But some of them also have to do with the social groups that we belong to. And so I think society as a whole treats people a little bit differently based on their gender, right? If you're a man or a woman, society interacts with you differently. If you are a really young person, if you're a child, or if you're a teenager, or if you're kind of middle aged, or if you're an older person, people treat you differently, right? Your appearance. Are you really, really stylish, or are you not stylish? Are you super good looking like Rihanna or The Rock, or are you just kind of average like the rest of us? Society treats us differently based on those things. And society treats us differently based on other things as well, like our race or ethnicity, sometimes based on our religious beliefs or affiliation. Sometimes society treats us differently based on our mental or physical abilities. Sometimes we get treated differently based on our social or economic class, or based on our nationality or our citizenship status, or the language we speak, or the accent that we have when we speak the language of a certain country. All of those things influence the way that society interacts with us. And because of that, our experience of the world is not identical. Okay? And so, again, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson walks through this world and has a really different experience of it than I do. And the same thing with Rihanna, and the same thing with all of you. Um, all of you are different people in terms of your individual characteristics, but also in terms of the social groups that you belong to. And so when you walk through society, you will have different experiences from each other and from me. And so to understand some of the concepts in this course, we have to understand that we are not all having the exact same experience all of the time. Even though we might be standing together in a crowd, or we might be, well, not now, but we might be standing together in a crowd, or we might be walking down the same street. Our perception of that is going to be just a little bit different. And it's going to be different based on who we are. That's what positionality is about. Okay? So where we'll take this idea is that difference does matter, unfortunately. And I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm not saying that it happens all the time, but the social groups that we belong to actually do matter. Our gender, our race, our class, these things do influence our experience in life. And so even though we might be very used to experiencing life, or we might be very used to thinking of ourselves as unique individuals, and the experience that we have in society being based on our uniqueness, that is partly true, but not entirely true. It's also important to think about the social groups that we belong to and how that also influences our experience in society. Okay. All right. So far, that is a lot. Do you want to take a little break? Normally in real class, I would give us a break, and so I think I might do that today as well. Can I give you, normally I would give you about a 10-minute break. Can I give that to you now? I'll give you 10 minutes and then we'll start back. Vancouver time, we'll start back at 9:03. Is that okay with everyone? You can stretch your legs, bathroom break, whatever you need to do. Is that okay? All right. So take a little break, stretch your legs, unfocus your eyes, whatever you need to do, and then we'll start back again shortly, okay? All right. Sounds good, people. Okay, and we're back. I think everyone's still here. Um, Quick question, people, that I really question that I really should know the answer to, but for some reason I can't find it in front of me. Um, this class ends at 9:50, correct? And then do we start the second block at 10:10? Can somebody set me straight on that? I thought I had that right, but maybe I don't. We're supposed to start at 10? Okay. At 10? Okay. For some reason I thought we changed that, but I could be mistaken, and I don't seem to have a copy of the secondary schedule in front of me, so all right. Let's see. Okay. Let's continue on, okay? So, where we left off, what I was trying to argue is that even though we are individual people with individual characteristics, and we should definitely treat each other as unique individuals because that's what we are, for the purposes of this class, it's also going to be important to consider the social groups that people belong to. Because again, the social groups that we belong to do actually influence our perception of society, so how we experience society, and the way that society treats us. And so, to be a man in whichever country you're in, or whichever country that you have originally come from, to be a man in that society is not the same thing as to be a woman in that society, for instance. Okay, so we have to sort of keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to tell or to talk about a little bit with you is the idea that sometimes knowledge is counterintuitive. And again, what I mean by counterintuitive is that sometimes things that are true or things that are factual are actually contrary to our expectation, or contrary to our intuition, the way that we feel things should be. Okay? So the very simplified version of this is sometimes that things that appear to be true are actually not true. Sometimes our senses lie to us. Sometimes our brain makes assumptions that are not true, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well. But yeah, sometimes knowledge is counterintuitive. And so, as a quick example, this. Now, hopefully, looking at this picture, most of us will immediately recognize that something is not right, right? This is not how the world is. I think most of us, or all of us, understand that, of course, the world is not flat, right? The Earth is a sphere. It's a round thing, like a ball, right? Unbelievably, there are people who actually do believe that the Earth is flat, believe it or not. But we won't really deal with them right now. Regardless, we all know the world to be, Earth to be a sphere, right? To be like a ball. But if you think about it, that's actually not an intuitive piece of knowledge for us, right? We happen to know that the Earth is round. We happen to know that it's a sphere. But that knowledge does challenge our common sense, because we don't really experience the world as round, right? If you think about it, if you look out your window, I think what you'll see is that the Earth is flat, right? You can't really tell that it's round. If you drop something on the floor, for instance, it doesn't just roll away to, the other side of the world, right? It just sits there. if you're in Vancouver and you look west, you can't see Japan, right? It's not visible. Um, and so again, even though that last one might not be correct. Um, Even though we experience the world as flat, the earth looks flat to us, it feels flat to us, we actually know that it's not. Okay, and so this is an example of knowledge being counterintuitive. The knowledge that the earth is round is not really that obvious to our perceptions, right? Because in our day-to-day life, we all experience the world as flat, right? It looks flat and it feels flat. Um, the only reason that we know it not to be is because of science, right? We've used scientific methods to expose the error of our perceptions, right? We have used scientific study to show us that even though the world feels flat, it's actually not, right? And so, again, why are we talking about this? Well, when we talk about human societies, the same issue comes into play. Sometimes the way that we think society works or the way that we feel society works isn't actually the way it's working at all. Our perceptions are not always correct in terms of understanding what's going on in the society that we live in. Okay? And so sometimes this shows up in a number of ways. And I've listed some social perceptions that people have that are based on their experience of the world, so similar to the flat earth. But again, those perceptions are not entirely accurate. And so here's a short list of some things that people say in connection with social justice issues and social inequality. Most of them are based on ideas of what people think they should say. Some of them are based on the way that maybe we wish things were. And sometimes they're based on people's personal experience. Okay? But all of them are flawed perceptions. Okay? And I will, if you look at this list and you think, oh gosh, I've said some of these things, you're in good company, because I've said probably almost all of these things in the past before I had a better understanding of kind of what social justice and social inequality was all about. So the first one here, people should be judged by what they do, not the color of their skin. Yeah, that's true. That's a good thing, right? That's something that we want to have happen. That's something that we want. That's a way in which we want the world to be. But that doesn't mean that that's the way that it actually works. I accept people for who they are. That's good. We should accept people for who they are. We should treat people as unique individuals. However, and I'll try to show this to you a little bit later, people are not very good at that. Many of us interact with the world based on our the social messages that we have kind of learned, and so we don't always treat people equally, and we don't always treat people or accept people for who they are. But again, we'll dig into that a little bit more later. Very similar, I see people as individuals. Yeah, we should see people as individuals, but society also treats us according to the social groups that we belong to, and so we need to remember that and identify that. This next one has to do a little bit with social inequality and conflicts that might arise around inequality. It's focusing on difference that divides us, right? So the idea that if we stopped pointing out the ways in which people were different, we'd all just get along better. And again, as with most of these, there's a little bit of truth to some of these ideas, but that's a bit of an oversimplification. Um, the way to cure racism is not just to stop talking about racism, right? That's not how it ends, right? There's more that needs to be done. And so again, there is some truth to a statement like that, but it's oversimplified and it's not entirely true. My parents taught me that all people are equal. That's good. All people should be treated equally and have equal opportunity, but people are unique, people are different, and so achieving that equality is sometimes not quite as easy as we might think it is, or we might wish it to be. A few more of these that some of us might have said. I know I've said a lot of them. I always treat everyone the same. That would be nice, but that's just not true, right? We don't treat our friends the same as we treat our grandmother, right? Or our parents the same as, some person we just bumped into on the street, right? We don't treat people the same. So yeah, that one's just false, right? I've been discriminated against, so I don't have any privilege. So there's a few terms in here that we haven't talked about yet: discrimination and privilege. But as we'll see once we sort of get to that point, that's a problematic statement as well. Our generation, which I assume is talking about younger generations, are more open-minded. Yeah, that's true, right? What we're seeing is that many people are becoming more open-minded about difference, and that's a good thing. I have friends from all races, and we are all fine with each other. That's awesome. That's really, really good. However, that doesn't mean that that people don't exist in societies and situations where racism is still a factor. Again, here, I don't think race and gender make any difference as long as you work hard. Again, there's an element of truth to something like that as well. If you want to succeed, often, hard work goes along with it. But your hard work is not the only thing that matters in terms of your success. There are other parts of your identity that sometimes will give you advantages or opportunities, and sometimes will make it more difficult for you to achieve what you want. And so again, the statement that I don't think race and gender make any difference as long as you work hard, that's the way that we would want things to be, but it doesn't mean that that's the way things are, right? You can hold that opinion, but the research that we have suggests that that's not quite the way the world works. It's white males who are in the minority now. Well, depending on what country you're talking about, of course. But if you're talking about Canada or the US, that's actually statistically not true. But people will say things like that anyway. Women are just as sexist as men. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about sexism, and men will be accused of being sexist, and the defense is women are just as sexist as men. There's not really a lot of truth to that statement, but we will, as we get a little further into this course, and once we define what sexism is and what oppression is, we'll be able to talk about that in a little more detail. But that statement isn't really true either. And so again, people hold a lot of opinions and ideas about social inequality and social justice and things like sexism and racism and religious oppression and things like that. People hold a lot of very strong opinions about these ideas, but a lot of them are based on faulty perceptions, just like the flat earth. Just because earth feels flat doesn't mean that it is. And similarly, just because society might feel equal to us, or we might feel that racism isn't really a big problem, doesn't mean that it's not. And so sometimes we are just simply not in the position to see what we need to see. Sometimes we're not really in the position to perceive society as it is, and that's based on a lot of different variables. But we'll talk about that as we go a little bit further. But in terms of those statements that we just read through, all of those are kind of oversimplifications. They're opinions that people have. Sometimes they're wishful thinking in terms of the way that we wish that the world was. Some of them are based on ideologies or stereotypes or cultural ideas that we've absorbed. Some of them, sorry, there's a truck going by here. Some of those ideas are based on the way that we want the world to see us, right? We don't want people to see us as racist or sexist or something like that. But again, all of those statements are false. And so the idea is that sometimes what we think we know is not really the way things are. Okay? So the question is then, how do we discover the truth? If the way that we think we see things or the opinions that we have, if those are ill-informed or if they don't represent the way that the world works, how do we discover the truth? How do we discover the way that the world actually does work? Well, part of it has to do with engaging constructively. Okay? Now, in this course, we're going to be talking about a lot of things that are emotionally reactive. Okay, I'm just gonna. Oh yeah, good. I can do that. Turn that off too. We're going to be talking about a lot of topics that are emotionally reactive. People tend to have very strong feelings about social justice ideas because they are connected to a lot of very core issues. Okay, so when we talked about identity a few minutes ago, I asked you to sort of describe yourself, and you suggested a bunch of different adjectives for who you were. But if you think about it, those social identities, even though you didn't suggest them automatically, I think we could agree that they're a very important part of who we are, right? If you're a man, or if you're a woman, if you're a young woman or a young man, that's a pretty big part of who you are as a person, right? Your gender is an important part of who you are. If you're a religious person, your religion is a very important part of who you are, right? Your race and ethnicity and your culture is a very important part of who you are. Your sexuality, right? Whether you're gay or straight or bisexual or lesbian or pansexual or any of the terms that are being used, that's a very important part of who you are as well, right? And so because we're talking about things that are such at the core of who individuals are, sometimes challenging those ideas is upsetting. Oh, hey, Jerk. Sometimes challenging those things are upsetting. The other thing that happens here as well is that when we talk about social justice ideas, often we maybe challenging people's idea of how the world works. I mentioned that um, we have a reality that we have socially constructed, right? And so we all have an idea, a belief about how the world works and what's fair and what's not, um, what kind of person that we are, what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a bad person. And when we talk about social inequality, there's a real potential for some of those beliefs to be challenged. Um, the story I've told, and Jarek has heard this one before, but that's okay. Um, when I was doing my teaching degree at University of Alberta, we had to take an Indigenous education class or an Aboriginal education class. Um, if you know anything about the history of Canada and Indigenous or Aboriginal people in Canada, you'll know that it's a fairly ugly history, and that Indigenous people in Canada have been subjected to a lot of racism and discrimination and brutality for hundreds of years. And so this class was the process of, for a lot of people, really learning the truth about that kind of brutal history. And a lot of Canadian students had to come to terms with the way in which they are part of a country where some people have been marginalized and discriminated against and disadvantaged, and the way that many of us actually have benefited from that. And that was some pretty uncomfortable knowledge for most of us to have to think about. And so people had a lot of different reactions to that class. A lot of people struggled through it. Some people felt kind of guilty or angry or upset or confused. People had some emotional reactions because it wasn't just it wasn't just knowledge that we were talking about, right? It wasn't just facts or things to be learned from a book. It was the things that we were learning actually changed who we thought we were, okay? It changed who we thought we were as Canadians. And so that was really difficult for me and for a lot of people in that class to come to terms with. And so when we talk about social justice ideas, sometimes people will have an emotional reaction to those topics because, again, they challenge our ideologies. They challenge our idea of who we are. Okay. I'll show you this little graphic here, and we'll come back to this graphic a couple of times. But this is sort of an imagining of what a culture looks like. And so it's kind of an iceberg, and it's based on that idea that, most of an iceberg is below the surface, and you only see a small part of it above the surface. And so when you think about any culture that you either belong to or when you're looking at another culture, a lot of the stuff that you see and that you associate with that culture, a lot of those things are just on the surface. So think about the way people dress, if the kind of food that they eat, the kind of artwork they might produce, the kind of sort of big celebrations or rituals that they engage in. You might hear people speaking a specific language. All of those are parts of culture that are very easily seen by outsiders, but most of what a culture is not visible. Most of what a culture really is are rules and behaviors and beliefs that tell people who they are and how they should behave. And the deeper you go in this little iceberg metaphor here, the deeper you go, the more emotional attachment people have to some of these ideas. And the more those ideas are kind of deep within their subconscious. And so when those ideas get challenged, people tend to have a much stronger reaction to them. And so people whose, when you talk about something like food or music, in terms of people within a given culture, their emotional investment in those ideas is not significant. And so if someone cooks a certain food that belongs to a certain culture and they don't do a very good job, or they change the recipe, most people don't get very upset about that kind of thing. But when you dig down into kind of the core beliefs of a culture, so when you talk about the definition of obscenity, for instance, so what things are considered obscene or not, what is it to be a man? What does that mean? Or what does it mean to be a woman? How should a woman act? How should a man act? When people start to violate those deeper rules, people have a much stronger reaction to it. And so a lot of the things that you deal with in social justice have to do with those very deeply held concepts within a culture. And so again, there's potential for people to have an emotional reaction, because the more deeply held a belief is, when you challenge it, people will tend to have a stronger reaction to it. Okay. Yeah, and so when we talk about some of these things, because we'll be talking about sex and gender and sexuality and race and religion and things like that, when we talk about them, we might find that our beliefs and our values and even our identities might be challenged. And so the information that we're talking about might be different from the way we understand the world to be. And we might kind of have feel a little bit emotional about that. And that's okay. Again, that's a perfectly natural thing to have happen when people encounter something that is that challenges their ideas of who they are and how the world works. Again, some people have fairly strong reactions to this. To be honest, this has never happened in any of my classes to any great degree. So I'm not concerned that anyone in here is going to, freak out about anything we talk about. But it's possible that some people will struggle with some of the things that we discuss. And so the question is then how to approach this stuff. And we're going to remember 5 things in terms of engaging with this material, okay? And I'll explain these really, really quickly. They're very simple. The first one is that we're going to strive for intellectual humility. And so there's 2 parts to this. The first part is the idea that we don't know everything, right? I don't know everything. My understanding of many of the topics that we discuss in this class continues to evolve and change. And so I don't feel exactly the same about all of these topics that I did when I first started teaching this class. And I suspect that as I learn more and think more, that my ideas will change again. And so we should be prepared for the idea that we don't know everything, that the way we think things are might not be the way that things are, and that our positions on things may evolve and change, and we have to be ready for that. I know that mine certainly have. We should also remember that the kind of things that we're talking about here are actually based on science. We often think about science in terms of, physics and chemistry and engineering and things like that, but social sciences are sciences as well. Hypotheses have to be suggested. evidence has to be provided, analyses have to take place, and people have to construct arguments to convince us that the way that they think the world works is actually correct, right? And so some of the things that we'll be talking about here, even though they might not feel like hard science, actually are. And we should be prepared to accept some of those conclusions just as we would, engineering or chemistry or physics or things like that. The second thing that we should remember is the idea that informed knowledge and opinion are not the same things. And we'll dig into this again maybe a little bit tomorrow or on Friday when we talk about critical thinking. But we should remember that just because someone gives us their opinion doesn't mean that we necessarily have to listen to it, and it doesn't mean that it's valid. Informed knowledge is really what we want to be looking for. So people who have done their homework, people who understand the subject matter in their discipline, so people who are experts, and people who have constructed arguments that we can actually understand. That's really what we should be looking for. There's lots and lots of opinions out there. Things like Twitter are made for opinions because you've only got a certain number of characters to say what you want to say. So there's tons and tons of opinions out there. People are very comfortable sharing their opinion with everyone else. But just because people have an opinion doesn't mean it's really worth listening to. And again, if lots of people are very good at expressing what they think, but they actually haven't done their homework. They don't have any informed knowledge. And so just because someone has an opinion doesn't mean that we need to listen to it. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. So often when we express our opinions, we're basically just rehearsing what we already think we know. Okay, we're confirming to ourselves that we are correct. And so what we want to one of the things that we want to develop in this course is the skills to examine our own beliefs, to think about the things that we believe and see if they're actually worth believing, if we should believe in them. Again, that's something that we'll dig into tomorrow or on Friday, okay? The third thing we'll want to do is we'll want to let go of personal anecdotal evidence and look at broad social patterns. And so if you haven't heard this word anecdotal or anecdote before, an anecdote is kind of a little story. And so we're all very good at telling anecdotes, right? We share with our friends what happened to us at school yesterday or what happened on the bus, or not that we can go any of these places or do any of these things, but in the past, we shared anecdotes with our friends about, what happened to us yesterday or today or the day before. And oftentimes we use those anecdotes to build a picture of what the world is like and what society is like. But again, lots of our personal experiences and our personal stories, we can't really expand them to make generalizations about society as a whole, right? So just because we had a certain experience doesn't mean that everyone has that experience. Just because, we have a friend who, is Chinese and this guy is like this, obviously we can't apply that to all Chinese people, right? So again, anecdotes are fun. They are the way that we understand the world in many cases, but in order to understand social inequality, we have to look at broader patterns within society rather than just our own little experiences. The fourth one, and I was just talking about this, the idea that we have to monitor our own emotional reactions to some of this material. Again, people often have an emotional reaction when you are challenging a deeply held belief. When you're telling them that the way that the world works is actually not correct. To reel back to our flat Earth scenario, when people in Europe started to learn that the Earth was actually not flat, it was round, people had a pretty strong reaction to that too. There were lots of upset, angry people. And so we should notice our own sort of defensive reactions, because they're actually kind of an invitation. They're an invitation for us to stop and ask ourselves, okay, if I'm upset about this, what belief of mine is being challenged? How do I think the world works? And why do I think that? And do I need to change that belief? Is that a valid belief? Is it something that I should believe? We'll dig into that a little bit more as we go forward. But just because we might have a defensive reaction to something, that's actually not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's a little signal for us to look at our own beliefs and see what it is we actually believe and why. And the last thing is that we need to recognize our own social positionality, right? We have to keep in mind that the way that we see the world is specific to who we are as people, in terms of our own individual characteristics and our own personalities, but more applicable to this course, our idea of who we are as social groups, right? And so again, when I walk down the street, people see me as this reasonably large white male person. And because people see me that way, they treat me in a particular way as well. And so any of you that might be walking down the street in Vancouver, you're going to have a different experience than I do. It's not going to feel quite the same, and people are going to interact with you a little bit differently than they interact with me. And so we have to recognize that that is true, that people are going to have different experiences of society. And based on your experience, you're going to feel that society works in a particular way that in which it may work or it may not work, right? We have to be open to the idea that sometimes the way society works is not visible to us. There are things that we can see, and there are things that we cannot see, simply because of who we are, okay? Whew, all right, so in the live chat comments, how is that? Maybe give me a quick thumbs up, or how comfortable do you feel with what I explained in terms of, did you understand it? Does it sound reasonable? Were you kind of with me, or were you lost? So maybe give me like a number 1 out of 10. So 1, you were like totally lost and had no idea what I was talking about. 10, you were right on top of it and you totally got it, or somewhere in between. So yeah, in the live comments, maybe just give me a quick number to let me know what you thought of that and how you feel. And if you have any questions, of course, you can throw them in there too, and I will and I'll answer them if I can. I said 8. Okay, 8 sounds pretty good. 8.75. That's very precise, but okay, that's good. That's good. 9, 8, 8, 9, 7, 8. All right. All right, that all sounded okay. That's good stuff. 6, okay, that's still good. We're doing okay. 7, that's good. Yeah, some of this stuff is good. Some of this stuff is very intuitive and it makes sense to us. Particularly, I think for younger generations, I think that many of you guys are going to be more tuned into some of these ideas than older generations are. But then some of it requires a little bit of extra digging and extra work because some things are not quite as simple as they might seem on the surface. But if that's where we are, if we're kind of between a 6 and an 8 in understanding, that's a good sign so far. Okay, any questions on that material so far that you want to ask? Okay. Again, as usual, if you have any questions or you need something from me, I'm always, well, not always, but often available on Microsoft Teams, so you can always send me a message and I'll answer it there. But if you don't have any questions, I think that might be all I have for you today. So I think I'll let you go. The slides that I went through here will be posted on Student Portal, so you will be able to see them again, so don't panic. And of course, this video will be posted, so I guess you can watch the whole thing again if you want. But yeah, other than that, I think I'll let you go for today. Some of you I'll see in comparative cultures in a few minutes, and others, I guess I'll see you tomorrow. So it was nice interacting with you. Definitely coolio. It was nice to have you here too, Jarek. Yeah, that's all I have for you. So I hope you have a good rest of the day. Enjoy your other classes, and I'll see you first thing tomorrow morning. Okay, so bye.